In this video, I want to reflect on what's happening in Israel and Gaza and to the Israeli people and the Palestinian people, and to talk a little bit about violence and understanding and our emotions, both negative and positive, and what that all means and how we can grow through this. Now, I've been horrified and greatly saddened by what is happening in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. An Israeli citizen who's been in touch with me since the awful events that took place on the 30th of September had this to report. He says, "I want to describe to you the difficult situation we're facing. We were attacked on Saturday with barbarism not seen since the Holocaust. About 2,000 to 2,500 terrorists from Hamas, which he equates with ISIS, entered the villages and kibbutzes near the border of Gaza. So most of the inhabitants in these kibbutzes are left-wing voters and long for peace. They employed many Palestinians whose homes were in Gaza and gave them work. But some of these employees betrayed their trust by systematically studying the field and passing on information to Hamas. On that Saturday, which was also the Jewish festival of Sukkot and a holiday, these terrorists went from house to house, murdering babies, children, women, men, and the elderly in cold blood and with unparalleled cruelty. In all, on that one day, 1,400 people were massacred, and more than 3,000 other people were injured. Entire families were murdered in their beds and homes. Women were brutally raped and murdered. 130 were kidnapped, including women, children, and old people with their caregivers. The task of identifying the bodies is long and difficult because they booby-trap the bodies with live grenades underneath them," he says. Now, whilst most of us are not directly affected, might feel horrified and saddened as I do, as well as perhaps worried about what might unfold, the people directly involved are angry as well as fearful. The Israeli citizen with whom I've just been in touch said, "My hands would tremble and tears fall from my eyes as I write this to you, as more and more testimonies are revealed." And I won't be able to put the links to all of these in a YouTube video, but maybe on a Facebook post I might. Of course, there is a history of pain, suffering, and injustice caused by the actions that today would be judged as war crimes on both sides of this conflict, so the anger is understandable. To get an idea of what lies behind the sense of injustice felt by both Jews and Palestinians, I recommend watching the BBC documentary, The Holy Land and Us, Our Untold Stories, which is available to view I think the BBC iPlayer, on BBC iPlayer. Again, I'll put the link if you in a Facebook post as well. Now, it follows the stories of British Jews and Palestinians and traces them back to the events that gave birth to the State of Israel and that led to the current situation. It's aimed at increasing our understanding of people caught up in this current crisis on both sides, and it was aired in March 2023, this year, that is, so prior to the recent events that seem to have torn the hopes of a peaceful settlement to shreds. It's clear that the perpetrators of the atrocities that sparked off this war are not the people of Palestine, but members of Hamas, a terrorist organization that is much like ISIS. Meantime, there are many Jews and Palestinians who, notwithstanding this story, are longing and working for peace and who do not agree with the actions of their respective governments. But it is these who are also suffering and have been killed in this war. And it's not surprising that they're angry. Another Jewish person whose Facebook post I read lists the many directions in which his anger is directed in this sad situation. And I quote, he says, "I'm angry at Hamas because of the vicious slaughter and widespread trauma they inflicted gleefully on so many people. I'm angry at Israel's vaunted intelligence and security communities and institutions whose often appalling moral decisions and violations of rights have they've been justified with recourse to the necessity for security and nevertheless failing to keep us safe. I'm angry at this absurd government led by a man who has, time and time again, placed his own interests and power above duty to country, while posing as a superlative patriot. And he's never paid a political price. I'm angry at his party for clinging to him despite his amorality, or perhaps immorality, because doing so has served their own interests. And at everyone who voted for any party in this government who hasn't apologised for empowering such a group of corrupt and irresponsible chauvinists and zealots. I'm angry at Hamas for undercutting the struggle for Palestinian rights and lending credence to the caricatures of Palestinians as bloodthirsty savages who just want to kill us Jews, which is far from the truth. This will not only cost Palestinian lives in the immediate, but it will also set back their pursuit of justice and dignity by decades. Here in Israel, it makes answering that refrain that they don't really want freedom, they just want us all dead and gone, exponentially more difficult. And they've reinforced the flawed attitude that any failure of brutality to subjugate others is evidence of the need for more brutality. I'm angry at the harm this will perpetuate for Israel and Israelis, now and in future generations on so many levels, dehumanizing themselves and us, dehumanizing us all, plunging us ever deeper into a crisis of hatred and violence. There is no security and dignity for Israeli Jews if there is no security and dignity for Palestinian Arabs. One cannot seek justice for peoples if one isn't seeking justice for all people. Justice only comes when we provide safety and dignity for all. Now, Maurice Nicoll, in his commentary on Gurdjieff's Fourth Way that has been the subject of my online courses recently, writes, "Violence is the antithesis of understanding. All violence has its roots in not understanding another. Understanding is the most powerful force we can create. So we have to create understanding, and all violence has its root in negative emotion, and for negative emotions do not lead to understanding but to violence." So he goes on, violence destroys everything in us, and to react with violence is the easiest of all things. To understand is the most difficult. In violence, one is totally asleep and has no understanding. So that is why I think it's so important not to express negative emotions, which is the Fourth Way teaching, because they effectively put a complete stop to any potential growth of understanding. And that, of course, means no development of you as a person. And if we do not keep our negative emotions in check, there's every chance that our behaviour will descend into the most base kinds of violence. But atrocities like this, and more overt forms of violence perpetrated in war, all begin in more subtle forms. So when I say the most base kinds of violence, I include thinking negative emotions, murdering someone in your thoughts, slandering them with your inner speech. It includes all forms of force, coercion, insistence, dominance, and manipulation. If not checked, it leads to the much more obvious forms of violence, and ultimately to the evil forms we've seen in the atrocities committed by Hamas against innocent Israeli citizens recently. Now, Gurdjieff, who passed on the wisdom of the Fourth Way to us in the Western world, said it is negative emotions that run the world, not sex, energy, or power, but negativity. There is clearly a lot of negative emotion in the world today. And given the injustice and painful experiences that individuals and communities have experienced, it's hardly surprising. But anger is not necessarily a negative emotion. The kind of anger that the person whose blog post I've quoted above is not negative. It arises out of a deep sense of empathy with those who are suffering and with which he himself is experiencing. And Jesus himself could be angry when confronted by some injustice, oppression, or evil. And there are several examples in the Gospels. Mark 1:41, for example, and Mark 10:14, but I'll put that in the text maybe. So What's the main difference between negative and positive emotions? They have different sources and different points of reference. Negative emotion is always self-referencing and is an expression of the wrong work of our emotional center. And those of you who've done my Fourth Way Enneagram course will know what I mean by that. And it arises out of one's ego personality. Besides anger, though, negative emotions also includes irritability, sadness, boredom, dislike, complaining, melancholy, malice, criticizing, impatience, resentment, envy, rage, annoyance, bitterness, grudges, dissatisfaction, etc. Now, the Enneagram of personality narrows these down to the 9 passions, and these were originally defined by the Desert Fathers as those emotions that destroy presence. That is a state of being intimately in touch with one's divine and true self and with the true divine, God. Now, all of this, which you will observe in yourself as well as others, is the wrong work of a sleeping machine, Gurdjieff said, who presumes everything should suit his or her own desires, agenda, and requirements. All of this is the wrong work of the emotional center. Positive motion, on the other hand, is always other referencing and arises when our emotional center is working as it was meant to, and this is the consequence of having developed a higher level of consciousness. It arises out of a deep empathy and genuine love for the other, because you know, in experience as well as intellectually, that despite all the different appearances, different points of view, different religious beliefs, we are all united in one interrelated network of energy. We all consist of stardust, if you like, the basic elements that arose in the event that sparked off the evolution of the universe. Not just the material elements, but also the spiritual dimensions of these. So at this time, more than ever before, I think it is important to take care of our own emotional responses to life. It's important to remove negative emotion from ourselves and from our emotional center. And that means working on causes in us rather than in trying to fix the circumstances of our life or what is happening to us or what is being said or done to us or around us. Now, Rebecca Nottingham, in her book on the Fourth Way work, says a cluster of unpleasant thoughts and feelings about another person that you have allowed to enter consciousness willingly can begin to grow. It is both for the sake of yourself and the other person that something must be done. That is, you must work on yourself to neutralize, as it were, this powerful material in you. All of your intelligence and sincerity, and incidentally also an understanding of what's involved from a Fourth Way perspective, which I teach in my course, will probably be required to neutralize, as it were, this poison, so that you can once more treat the other person fairly inside yourself. You'll have to drop all self-justifying, and above all else, you'll have to remember what you have observed in yourself and what you are like before you criticize so easily this other person. Remember what Jesus said about the plank in one's own eye, the beam in one's own eye, trying to remove the splinter in somebody else's. And of course, P.T. Ouspensky, Gurdjieff's early follower, in his book on the Fourth Way, says we think that negative emotions are produced by circumstances, whereas all negative emotions are in us, inside us. And this is a very important point. We always think our negative emotions are produced by the fault of other people or by fault of circumstances, whereas our negative emotions are in ourselves and are produced by ourselves. There is absolutely not a single unavoidable reason why somebody else's action or some circumstances should produce a negative emotion in me. It is only my weakness. No negative emotion can be produced by an external causes if we do not want it. We have negative emotions because we permit them, justify them, and explain them by external causes, and this way we do not struggle with them. So one of the great objects of Fourth Way work, which is, and I'm quoting Maurice Nicoll here, he says, is to awaken the emotional center, which is drugged with negative emotions and with all the small emotions of self, of vanity and of self-conceit, etc. Again, all the passions of the personality as described in the Enneagram of Personality. So the way to do this is to press the pause button as soon as we are aware of the heat of emotion and step back from our immediate thoughts and feelings. And these are conditioned automatic responses to what is happening. It is what Gurdjieff meant by saying that we are machines, and by doing this we can decide that no matter how negative the emotion, we refuse to give expression to it. And having pressed the pause button, so to speak, we then have to learn to observe what's going on, both around us and within us. And as we become the observer, rather than the person being done to or acting, we are no longer identifying ourselves with the emotions we are feeling and the thoughts we are observing, and which are often merely expressions of the habitual responses of our ego personality. The person who manages to observe themselves is not identified with what they are observing in themselves or with what they are experiencing that is happening to them or around them. Once you've observed in yourself, that is, you've verified that sleep and mechanicalness and false personality exist not only in you but also in everyone else, it becomes easier to forgive because you understand the nature and power of sleep. To understand what Gurdjieff meant by sleep, he basically said that when we think that we are awake, we are actually asleep. We are not seeing things straight. We're in a dream world of our own making. So we need to wake up. And of course, this is what the sages of ancient wisdom traditions have said all along. So this helps to reinforce the real I, the true self, which will then give you more power to forgive and understand. That is why Jesus was able to say, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing," when he was being nailed to a cross. To understand, one must learn, and learning has to be experiential. That is, we're able to perceive in ourselves the truth of what we are being taught. That's the thing we are being taught really is so. And it leads to understanding, because we understand it from experience. The work teaches, that's Gurdjieff's fourth way, that knowledge and understanding are quite different. I may know many things, but may never have perceived them in myself, the truth of any of them. And in that case, I do not understand what I know, though I may retain it in my memory. And if you manage not to express these emotions and observe them uncritically in order to see them clearly, you will find yourself outside the flow and momentum of human stimulus-response behavior. From this more objective point of view, whether in the moment or later, on reflection you can carefully look at what was behind your negative feelings. If, however, you are not able to intervene and prevent the expression of negativity, all is not lost, says Rebecca Nottingham. You may be able to learn as much, if not more, from the times you fail than from the times you succeed. You will certainly learn that it is not easy to resist a mechanical response and how strong the pull of sleep is. You may also be able to see what aspect of your own psychology is at work, overriding your efforts. And if you can see that, then you may be able to sacrifice its requirements in order to be successful next time. And so you can learn from your failures as well. However, if the emotion is anger arising whilst we are living at a higher level of consciousness, then there is a place for expressing it, as has been exemplified above. Because when it is coming from our higher consciousness, our higher and true self, its energy can be used in constructive rather than a destructive way. And one of the constructive uses of this higher form of anger is to speak out and expose the evil, or oppose evil powers in non-violent ways. This is the path that Jesus chose, and it is the path that the Old Testament prophets chose as well. Finally, it is important not to presume to know how to use the energy released by not expressing negativity, because when we express negativity, we are using up energy, we feel drained. But if we have this extra energy, how are we to use it positively? So if you're looking for self-empowerment, you're on the wrong path. Only the wisdom of a developed higher consciousness can direct you in the right way to use the energy. And anyway, the right use of energy will always lead you towards a state of humility. And it is this that actually allows your authentic being to exist and right action, therefore, to proceed from it. And so witness how Jesus responded to people and situations that confronted him. So the process of cleansing the emotional center and the development of a real I are permanent solutions to the problem of insecurity. A transformed emotional center has no requirements from the world. It finds its being and meaning in giving to the world. Real I knows its authenticity and doesn't need external validation. And when we have no external requirements, we can be at peace. Now, I'm not offering a simplistic solution to the very intractable problems of the Middle East at the moment. I'm simply saying that the more people are able to respond to the circumstances we find ourselves in this way, from a higher emotional center, from a higher level of consciousness, from their true authentic being, the more it is likely that there will be more people of peace. And we can therefore bring the world to peace by creating a critical mass of peaceful people. Let's pray for that. Thank you.